Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown. And in today's episode, we're going to cover allowing zone companies to operate locally and vice versa. And that is to allow local companies to operate in a zone, whether or not this is a good idea. Now, before we get into anything, let's define what a zone is. So a zone is a geographic area, right? Um, you could say four square walls, but I don't want people to be trapped in thinking it's just walls alone. But it is a decree, a law, a regulation that brings this forward that says this area is designated as a zone, whatever you want to call it, free zone, special economic zone, enterprise area, industrial park, whatever you want to call it. This area is designated as such, and we're going to develop it as such, whether the government puts in the infrastructure or gets private sector or a combination of the of both through some sort of public-private partnership. In addition, it's aimed towards attracting investment, whether local or foreign, to come and develop and operate within these areas. And of course, there are incentives typically associated with them, some sort of tax break. Sometimes it is a reduced corporate income tax rate or zero. Sometimes it can be, or a combination of these things, duty free of all your materials as long as it remains in the zone, whether for building purposes, refurbishment, or for actual operations or inputs into production, etc. So zones by their nature look more attractive than the local economy, as they ought to. That's the very reason for the zone. The zone, it has been said, is basically an economy operating at its best, right? So that sometimes creates a tension between the local economy and the zone economy, and the two are increasingly working together, and the lines between the two are increasingly being eroded or erased for multiple reasons. One of which is global economic governance and the difference between the two. Things having to do with WTO, OECD in terms of taxation. So there are variety of reasons why that line, that hard line that used to be there, it's becoming more blurry. And in recently, we've seen where Dubai, for example, has allowed for zone companies to operate within the local economy, of course, with caveats, and those are necessary. So whether or not it's a good idea for this to be allowed, that is to allow zone companies to operate in your regular economy, and the local economy, regular economy, to companies to operate in a zone, much will depend on the objectives of your zone regime, right? And the maturity of your zone regime. Dubai, particularly its Jebel Ali free zone, is a very mature free zone model, and it has used the zones to catapult itself and to help it develop its local economy, but also, and that includes infrastructure and all of these other things. As a result, them allowing the zone company to set up branches outside doesn't really hurt them, right? Doesn't really hurt them, or doesn't deviate. In fact, it works very, very well with their overall economic policies. And of course, with caveats. So one of the major caveats is that the zone company has to operate or use separate accounts, that so it has to account for all its economic activity, that zone, and then it's separate books, economic activity that takes place in the local economy. And there's other caveats that it has there as well. But it's important that if you're going to allow such things, that you look at the pros and cons. In terms of now allowing the local economic players to operate in the zone, there is positives and negatives. One of the major negatives is potential for tax base erosion, tax leakage, etc., etc. Um, but at the same time, just like Dubai did, you can also put in, although this is the reverse, put in certain necessary caveats or certain necessary safeguards to prevent that. One of the things that the local economy players tend to look at is all the incentives, and it looks so nice and rosy. But there's also a catch. Typically, with zones, there is capital requirements that a local company is not subjected to. You might be asked to put up or invest, 5, 6, or 10 or so. I'm just picking random numbers, millions of dollars to start a company, local economy company. You don't typically have such capital requirements, or even or if they are, they're not that high, right? So when doing that comparison, you have to we have to bear that in mind. Now, to allow the local economy to operate in the zone, that can come in a variety of different forms. You can bring them in to be goods and services suppliers, or you could allow it that they can come in as players, but of course with the same capital requirements. Um, and of course, with potentially having to go into different economic activities than what they would that they're already carrying out. And maybe there is even certain with the tax authorities that you have to enter certain agreements, such as transfer pricing, to see how the part of whether, and that's the other thing, whether or not you're going to set up two separate companies, or if it's the same company, how the zone activity and the local activity, how those two interact and intersect, to prevent any sort of tax base erosion. So if the local economy is being taxed at 20% and the zone is at 10%, of course there's a natural um, inkling to migrate towards the lower tax jurisdiction. It just so happens to be in your same country. Uh, so you want to not to prevent that, which is called tax base erosion. You put up certain safeguards. One of the one is absolute way of saying, it's just not allowed. That's one, but there are other ways to deal with it that are not as absolute, where only a certain percentage, or you have to set up a separate company and keep separate accounts, different things. Of course, you have the capital requirements still, so you're not going in there as a part of the local economy, and also you don't get to count your existing assets as part of the capital allocation, and all of these different things. So there's a myriad of ways. So in terms of just answering the question at the beginning, whether or not it's a good idea to allow for um, zone companies to operate in the local economy, and also and or to allow local companies to operate in the zones, much will depend on your objectives, of your zone regime, and which of course fits into a wider economic framework, and what that objective is, right? So if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see me do a particular topic, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you. Bye for now.